All right, everybody, it's May 28th. Welcome to Satsang. Today, we are going to talk about meaning. And so it's a really fun topic. So it can actually bend your mind a little bit because in essence, what we're doing is saying that the what mind creates, which is meaning, is really not where the action is. And yet we spend all of our time, pointers and construct all of what we do is built in meaning, and our whole lives are live on a story or meaning. That's what they get translated into, so much so that we think we live within the meaning or the story. So it's always a fun topic, and it's one you're probably going to want to revisit from time to time because it's one that um, you capture it, right? But then it descends. It becomes more like all wisdom. The second time you hear it, you go, I heard that, but now it has a whole different sense to it. So just remember, meaning is one of the fun ones. So I picked out a passage which I think you'll find interesting as well. It's chapter 18, and I am that. And it's to know what you are, find out what you are not. And so what you're going to see here is, and just watch because you're going to see a conversation um, embedded in meaning, attempting to get out. Right? That's what this little piece is. So the questioner, and it starts out with a huge question. By the way, he describes the whole thing, and you'll hear this, and you're going to see that this is someone who is really constructing what he's trying to understand in a world of meaning. Right? He says. So he's talking in Nisargadatta. He says, your way of describing the universe as consisting of matter, mind, and spirit is one of many. He said, there are other patterns to which the universe is expected to conform, and one is at a loss to know which pattern is true and which is not. Okay, so notice right away, we've already decided that patterns can be true and they cannot be true. That's a function of meaning. What does it mean? Is it true or is it not? One ends up, and this is probably one of the best sentences in this whole thing. He says, one ends up suspecting that all patterns are only verbal and that no pattern can contain reality. Right? So in the question, he basically gives us the whole thrust of what we're going to talk about today. But you're going to see he can't hold that. He says that, but then he's fighting it, and that's what the question's about here. He says, according to you, reality consists of three expanses: the expanses of matter energy, expansive consciousness, and of pure spirit. Right? Now notice, now he's got a construction. This is what you're talking about. This is how you constructed things. The first is something that has both movement and inertia that we perceive. We also know that we perceive. We are conscious and also aware of being conscious. Thus, we have two: matter energy and consciousness. Matter seems to be in space, while energy is always in time, being connected with change and measured by the rate of change. Okay. Now, this is interesting because physics has kind of moved to where they see time and space as the same thing. And of course, that's something very few people can get their mind around. That was an Einsteinian ad 50 or more years ago. Um, so consciousness seems to be somehow here and now in a single point of time. But you seem to suggest that consciousness too is universal, which makes it timeless, spaceless, and impersonal. I can somehow understand that there is no contradiction between the timeless and spaceless and the here and now. But the impersonal consciousness I cannot fathom. To me, consciousness is always focalized, which is FOCAL, focalized, centered, and individualized, a person. You seem to say that there can be perceiving without a perceiver, knowing without a knower, loving without a lover, acting without an actor. I feel that the trinity of knower, knowing, knower, and known can be seen in every movement of life. Consciousness implies a conscious being, an object of consciousness, and the fact of being conscious. That which is conscious, I call a person. A person lives in the world, is a part of it, affects it, and is affected by it. Okay, so there's your setup. So that's quite a setup for a questioner at talking to Maharaj. Maharaj then says, why don't you inquire how real are the world and the person? Right? Now, so that's how you get it, that he's immediately under meaning, right? How real is it? Now, real in the sense that he's talking about is something that always was, is now, and always will be, um, as opposed to something that simply arises and falls. Real. Real to us a lot of times is does it exist? So this is real in the way that most of us consider reality. If I hit myself in the head with this, it'll hurt. So that makes that real. In terms that he's speaking about, real means always has existed, always will exist. It's always present. Okay. And the questioner then says, "Oh no, I need not inquire." He says, "If a person is not less real than the world in which the person exists." Maharaj says, "Then what's the question?" He says, "Are persons real and universals conceptual, or are universals real and persons imaginary?" Right? That's quite a question if you think about it, right? So notice what he's trying to do is he's trying to build a structure, a meaning, right? So his questioning with Maharaj is to try to figure out what's the structure, what's the meaning. Maharaj says neither are real. Right? Questioner, surely I am enough to merit your reply, and I am a person. Maharaj says, not when asleep. He, the responder says, submergence is not absence. Even though I am asleep, I am. Maharaj, he said, to be a person, you must be self-conscious. Are you so always? Questioner, not when I sleep, of course, nor when I am in a swoon or drugged. During your waking hours, are you continually self-conscious? That's what Maharaj is after here. He says, no, sometimes I am absent-minded or just absorbed. Maharaj, are you a person during the gaps in self-conscious, in self-consciousness? He says, of course I am. I am the same person throughout. I remember myself as I was yesterday and yesteryear. Definitely, I am the same person. Now, notice what he's doing is, in order for a person to be a person, there's a definition of what a person is, right? He's assuming that that definition exists even when he's not aware of it. And what Maharaj is pointing him to is to say, when you don't know that you're even there, that you are that you exist. In other words, there's no awareness or consciousness there. Are you still a person? He's trying to puncture that. He's trying to puncture that. He says, Maharaj then says, so to be a person, you need memory. And the person says, of course. And then he says, well, without memory, what are you? He says, incomplete memory entails incomplete personality. Notice he's very into meaning here. Incomplete memory entails incomplete personality. Without memory, I cannot exist as a person. Ah. He says, surely you can exist without memory. You do so in sleep. He says, only in the sense of remaining alive, not as a person. Now remember, just above, he was talking about how he was always a person throughout everything. Now he's had to switch. Maharaj has forced him to take a look at it, and now he has penetrated the first little piece. He said, since you admit that as a person you have only intermittent existence, can you tell me what are you in the intervals between experiencing yourself as a person? What are you in between? He says, I am, but not as a person, since I am not conscious of myself in the intervals. I can only say that I exist, but not as a person. Maharaj, shall we call that impersonal existence? Question mark. Question, I would rather call it unconscious existence. Right? So I'm there, but I'm not conscious of it. I am, but I do not know that I am. Maharaj, you have said just now, I am, but I do not know that I am. How could you possibly say it about being in an unconscious state? No, I could not. He says you can only describe it in the past tense. I did not know. I was unconscious in the sense of not remembering. Question, having been unconscious, how could I remember and what? He says, were you really unconscious or just do not remember? Okay, really important. How am I to make out? Well, consider, do you remember every second of yesterday? Of course not. Were you then unconscious? Of course not. So you are conscious and yet you do not remember. Yes. Remember, he just said that wasn't the case earlier, right? So he keeps getting doubled back on himself. He says, maybe you were conscious in sleep and do not remember. He says, no, I was not conscious. I was asleep. I did not behave like a conscious person. How do you know? I was told so by those who saw me sleep. He says, all they can testify to is that they saw you lying quietly with closed eyes and breathing regularly. They could not make out whether you were conscious or not. Your only proof is your own memory, and a very uncertain proof it is. Right? So notice how that breaks down meaning. You see what I mean? In other words, when we use meaning, we apply it as though it's always the case. Meaning is always there, correct? But what he's pointing out here is that meaning seems to only be there when you're conscious, and that in between we don't even really know what we are. So how could meaning be there? He says, yet, yes, I admit on my own terms I am a person only during waking hours. What I am in between, I do not know. Awesome. He says, at least you know that you do not know. Since you pretend not to be unconscious, to be conscious in the intervals between the waking hours, leave the intervals alone. Let us consider the waking hours only. Question, I am the same person in my dreams. Maharaj agreed. Let's consider those together, waking and dreaming. The difference is merely in continuity. Were your dreams consistently continuous, bringing back night after night the same surroundings and the same people, you would be at a loss to know which is the waking and which is the dream. Henceforward, when we talk of the waking state, we will include the dream state too. He says, agreed, I am a person in conscious relation with a world. Right? Notice the separation. It's me and the world. Maharaj, are the world and the conscious relation with it essential to your being a person? He says, even immured in a cave, I remain a person. Maharaj, it implies a body and a cave and a world in which they exist. Yes, I can see the world and the consciousness of the world are essential to my existence as a person. He says, thus makes the person a part and parcel of the world, or vice versa. The two are one. And I used to say that I would ask people, I would say, everybody raise their hand if you've ever woken up and the world wasn't there when you did. All right. So we think that we're separate from the world, and yet we have an experience consciously of never having been in a situation where the world wasn't there when we were conscious, right? If I'm there, the world's there. So Maharaj says the two are one. They're the same thing. He says, consciousness stands alone. The person and the world appear in consciousness. Okay, this is the questioner, by the way. Maharaj says, you said appear. Could you add disappear? He says, no, I cannot. I can only be aware of my and my world's appearance. As a person, I cannot say the world is not. Without a world, I would not be here to say it. Because there is a world, I'm here to say there is a world. He said, well, maybe it is the other way around. Because of you, there is a world. He says, to me, such a statement appears meaningless. He says, the meaningless may disappear upon investigation. Questioner, where do we begin? Maharaj, all I know is that whatever depends is not real. This is that little definition I was talking about. The real is truly independent, since existence of the person depends on the existence of the world, and it is circumscribed and defined by the world. It cannot be real. Question, it cannot be a dream, surely. Even a dream has existence when it is cognized and enjoyed or endured. Whatever you think and feel has been, but it may be what you take it to be. What you think to be a person may be something quite different. Right? So there you go. The who am I? He says, so here you go. And Maharaj is now going to finish it with him, right? I am what I know myself to be. That's what meaning is, right? I am what I know myself to be. I am what I know the world to be. I know whatever I am conscious. That's what knowing is. And what we're pointing at is that knowing isn't that. Maharaj, you cannot passively say you are what you think yourself to be. Your ideas change from day to day and from moment to moment. Your self-image is the most changeful thing you have. It is utterly vulnerable at the mercy of a passerby, a bereavement, the loss of a job, an insult, and your image of yourself, which you call a person, changes deeply. Now, here's an interesting thing. I always say it's interesting. I like to eavesdrop. So walk in a restaurant sometime and start to eavesdrop. And here's what you're going to hear. You're going to hear people, a couple has been married for 40 or 50 years. And what are they saying to each other? They're basically telling each other who they are, right? That's what most people spend all their time doing. Why? That's the changeability. You change every minute and every day. So what you have to do is you always, if you're with somebody, you have to update them. It's really important. They need to know who you are, right? So you spend your entire time telling them who you are, and you have the software updates that come in daily, right? Or even minute by minute. Oh, I thought that's who I was, but you know what? That changed. Now this is what I am. I started breakfast as an atheist, and by the end of the day, I mean, it changed, and now I'm studying to be a priest, like that. Who knows, right? But this is who I am, right? He says to know what you are, you must first investigate and know what you are not. And to know what you are not, you must watch yourself carefully, rejecting all that does not necessarily go with the basic fact. I am. The idea is I am born at a given place at a given time for my parents, and now I am so and so, living at, married to, father of, employed by, and so on, are not inherent in the sense of I am. Think about that for a minute. All of the descriptors, is that part of I am? No, that's the add-on. Our usual attitude is of I am this. Separate consistently and perseveringly the I am from this or that, and try to feel what it means to be, just to be, without being this or that. All of our habits go against it. The task of fighting them is long and hard sometimes, but clear understanding helps a lot. Okay? Here's the last sentence of it, right? The clearer you understand that on the level of mind, that you can be described in negative terms only, the quicker you will come to the end of your search and realize your limitless being. Right? So meaning, see what meaning does. Meaning basically attempts to capture the arising and the falling of what is in consciousness, which would be this body, mind, and me as a person, right? And in that capturing is the bondage. When we basically insist on construction, we insist on meaning, and that meaning is the prison. That's the bondage that we talk about. I'm in bondage. Yeah, your intuition is telling you that all the time. I am in bondage. Why? Because you built a prison and you're now living in it. Right? I am in bondage. Right? But here's the easy thing, right? When you see that meaning is what keeps that all together. When you see that's the case, right, the bondage basically disappears. It was never there to begin with. It was just what was being applied by the mind and being followed by the belief that that's what I am. I love there's a really great story about um, the French Revolution. I'm trying to think of that famous prison that they have in Paris where they put everybody. I don't think it's the Bastille. That's in a different place. But anyway, there's a famous prison in Paris. I look it up. You'll see you'll recognize it immediately. But anyway, the revolution was happening in kind of a very fast way. So as they went through the city and they were basically liberating everyone, they just sent the guys into the prison and they say, just go down the cell blocks and unlock all the doors. And they did that, right? And because they were just freeing everybody, we're going to free everybody. And a day later, they came back to the prison and they walked into the prison and there it was. The doors were shut and the prisoners were still inside. And the prisoners were like, they said, "Why are you inside?" And they said, "Well, this is a prison. We're in prison." And they said, "We unlocked the doors." And one of the prisoners reached out and just pushed on the door and the door opened. And he says, "Oh my God, the door was open all along. There it was. I was free and I didn't know it." Same with meaning. Push the door open. Right? I was there and I didn't know it. Right? The 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 sense of bondage that we have is inherited, learned, uh, and then self-imposed. Right? And that comes through how we look at meaning. Now it's interesting when you do what we do in this kind of the non-dual Advaita approach. What we're doing is we're taking the intellect to, in essence, dissolve the intellect. That's what we're actually up to, or at least take the identifying juice out of the intellect, the part that holds the structure. Um, and I noticed that in the beginning, when you look at this conversation that we just went through with Maharaj, did you notice how detail oriented it was? Did you notice how the questioner was really dedicated to trying to figure out, well, what's the new model that I live in? What's my new prison look like, right? That was what he was dedicated to doing, right? So there's two things that will keep you in bondage. One is always creating a world of meaning, right? And then the second thing is demanding that awakening happen on your terms. Those are the two things that are going to kill you every time, right? So when you see that meaning has this particular piece, and then you see that life happens without that meaning being circumscribed, you've now walked in. Now, here's what I was going to say though. I noticed as I moved into non-duality and Advaita that I very much needed to understand the nuances and the pieces and how to put them together, much like in this conversation here. I worked on it constantly. That was something I read. I was attracted to. I was very attracted to a lot of the folks that were just much more finite in how they would say things. Right. And then over the years, what I've noticed is that um, I'm not really very interested in that anymore. It's not necessary, right? It's not necessary unless you hold the world a certain way, and that needs to be undone, right? Understanding all of this, not necessary. So when you listen to one of these satsangs, if you get lost in it, that's great. Don't worry about it. What that means is that there's probably a whole bunch you don't have to dissolve, right? Your world doesn't live in that way. So not understanding the three realms that this fellow talks about and how and time and space and all of those things, right? If that's not what works for you, right, then that's great. Don't think the normal thing for a human to say is, "Oh my God, I don't understand all the concepts." Right? These guys are talking about things and I don't understand them. We are in a movement and a transmission that ultimately dissolves all of that anyway. So why learn it all and then dissolve it, right? If you listen to a very nuanced and detailed piece and you don't understand it, but the stories and the pointers that are simple are delivering what you need. As I said, I've just noticed that in my time, I've migrated to that simplicity. That's where the horsepower is, right? So, so remember that. Okay, here's my piece on meaning. I'm gonna we'll walk through it. It's kind of a fun one. So meaning, it was a typical misty Bay Area morning, and I walked into the nameless, faceless building that housed accounts payable for North Face.
Uh,
Fog hadn't burned off yet. Inside it was what you'd expected, cubicles laid out in a grid, drab olive metal file cabinets, the fluorescent buzz that has scored every back office I've ever consulted in. I'd spent a good chunk of my career in rooms exactly like this one, and yet something was different here. I couldn't put my finger on it walking in, but it had its own gravity. Some presence was being held in the place by the people moving through the halls. They walked differently. They looked up when you passed. I finally cornered a young woman in her cubicle, accounts payable clerk, mid-20s maybe. I told her more or less that I had been in a lot of these rooms and this one was different. And could she tell me why? What's going on here? She looked at me for a long second, decided I actually wanted to know, and gave me the straight scoop. She says, most folks that come in here think we're processing accounts payable, figuring out the right amount, paying it at the right time, getting the best terms for the company. But that's not what we're doing. She says, what we're doing here is creating the next generation of conservationists. Inspiring to say at least the presence in the room had a source. This group had taken a deadly boring objective, and accounts payable is that, and quietly replaced it with an inspirational possibility. They had done, in the language of our work, an Nisargadatta move. They had figured out what they were not. They were not in any ways that mattered to them processors of invoices. And they had named something else that they could put their lives behind. Boy, howdy, did that change the building. But they were one step short. Because the move they made, perfect as it was for what it gave them, is the move most seekers make when they hear the great via negativa of the lineage. Nisargadatta said in chapter 18 of I Am That, is unflinching on this point. To know what you are, find out what you are not. What he is not saying, find out what you are not, and then go find a better description to put in its place, which is what these folks had done, right? He is saying, keep going. Body, not me. Mind, not me. Feelings, not me. Thoughts and memories and roles and history of the body, mind, organism itself, not me. The very I am that watches all of it arising. Even that eventually is not me. The whole exercise has only one direction. You are not anything that you can perceive or conceive of, because you are the perceiving and the conceiving itself. And that can be turned around and named like a thing on a shelf. It cannot be turned around and named like a thing on the shelf, right? So no replacing it, right? I had a conversation today about things that are happening. It was with Brad, by the way, and things that are happening in his life that are arising, free samples, as I would call them. And the thing I always say is, you know, don't be taken by the flashing light. It's not about what you see, but it's about the seeing itself. Right. Brad, of course, knew that, but I told him anyway. All right. What remains after a real walk through all that elimination is not a better story. What remains is no story at all. And here we land on the point that I want to put in front of us this week. Most seekers, including this one for a long time, missed the destination because they sneak a replacement story in just before the elimination finishes its work. The North Face folks weren't seekers and they didn't need to take the move all the way. The replacement story was doing real work in their lives and company. Fine. Good for them and good for the planet. But the seeker, the same instinct stops the teaching cold. You strip away the manager, the executive, the husband, the father, the achiever, the failure, the spiritual world, and then right at the lip you put down awakened being or consciousness expressing itself or a wave of the ocean. Same move, smaller wardrobe. The lens has gone underground again. Okay. The actual terrain Nisargadatta is pointing to has no story in it. It is meaningless. And the mind, the moment it hears this this word recoils, that recoil is the ego intuiting its own dissolution, right? The dissolution that says it's no longer in charge, right? Because meaning is exactly what the ego trades in. What meaning the ego has, without meaning, the ego has no currency, no money to spend. So it pushes back, it hires lawyers, it builds the replacement stories at speed. Yep. Ramesh named the whole move as cleanly as it has ever been named. And this, I'm here to tell you, listen to this. This is probably one of the best things you'll ever hear. To consider that the world has no meaning or purpose is merely to say that the world is not centered on humanity, right? In order for the ego to be, the world has to be centered on us. Starts with us, then it's me. So whenever people talk to me about human evolution and they're talking, I'm always like, no, be really careful. Because when you things change, but to say that things are getting better or improving in some way, right? I think is an absolute egoic move. It's just we're doing it in mass rather than in one single ego, right? Okay, without his ideals and motivations, an individual is frightened of being nothing in the nothingness of a purposeless world. Nothing in the nothingness of a purposeless world. In actuality, man's ideals of purpose as the basis of life and nature are nothing but his own conditioned concepts. Nature cannot be seen in terms of human thought, logic, or language. What appears cruel and unjust in nature seems so only when the matter is considered from a viewpoint of a separated and estranged individual human. But the rest of nature is totally unconcerned because the rest of nature is not human-hearted. So you are nature, right? And you arise within nature in terms of what it is that we see. The body mind simply arises. No need for that body mind to have a story, attributes, or whatever else goes with it. This is the diagnosis whole. The fear is not of meaningless. The fear is of being nothing in the nothingness, which is to say the fear of finally seeing through the conditioned concept that put humanity at the center to begin with. Nature is unconcerned. It never signed up for our story, right? The rest of manifestation has been getting on with itself the whole time, while a small and busy corner of it kept convincing itself that the show was about it. But meaningless is the apperceptive terrain of awakening. That's the sentence I'd like to leave with you. Not as something to believe. The mind can't believe it, the mind can't hold it, but as a direction of looking. The relief that lives there is unlike any relief the meaning business has ever delivered, precisely because that nothing more is being demanded of you. Nothing further has to be lined up. Nothing additional has to be defended. Life simply lives itself. Manifestation goes on arising. The body mind that is reading this sentence keeps doing the body mind things, right? I was told the other day that in one of my songs, I was itching my nose a lot. There you go. The body mind was doing its body mind things, right? It says it exactly as it would have done anyway, because the energy that was always running, it is the energy of totality. And it never ran out of programming when Alan briefly thought he was in charge. I want to show you how this plays out in the small change of daily living because the change is real and it's visible. Take humility. The ordinary humility we admire is the ego's recognition that the inflated version of itself is perhaps an overstatement. And especially in the world today, think about how people basically polish their image and then deliver it, right? So when I say possibly an overstatement, I'm not sure possibly is how it does, not sure it belongs there. It says the ego adjusts. The adjustment of being humble, right? The adjustment is now taken delivery of by the ego. I am humble now. Right? And humility becomes an attribute, then a habit, then not too long a tool, and in some cases a strategic weapon in the machinations of ego happenings. We've all met the humble one who is, in a quiet way, very pleased with how humble he is. Spiritual clothes on the same old doer. In the domain of meaningless, there is no ego to do the dialing back. It is simply seen that every body mind is a mix of good and not so good, gifts and limits, beautiful moves and ugly ones, and that none of them are mine to own or be embarrassed about. Humility ceases to be a pronouncement and becomes a description. It's no longer a personal attribute, is a noticing of what is, right? I am not all that. Yeah, easy. That's clearly how it is. Vulnerability works the same way. We admire vulnerability because we are taught it is hard. And it is hard so long as there is a you to be exposed and a you to manage the exposure. When it is seen that there is no separate entity in there to begin with, the whole calculation changes, right? The whole calculation, I'm sorry, collapses. What is there to disclose? An arising body mind has whatever it has. The disclosure happens or it doesn't. The audience reacts or it doesn't. The whole circle that the ego runs around vulnerability, the rehearsals, the careful staging, the cost benefit analysis has nothing left to play with. Right? I always say that I love that we're all concerned about privacy, right? And I'm kind of like, just call me. I'll tell you whatever you need to know. What do I care? Right? You know, what's privacy exactly? Right? And then, of course, we're worried about privacy, and then we proceed to post, more than post and vomit everything we can into social media. So our concern about privacy may not be as sincere as we think it is, but that's another subject for another day. He says, you may notice, okay, here we go. He says, what looks from the outside like courage, vulnerability, from the inside is simply the absence of somebody who needs protecting. No courage needed there. You may notice as you read teachers in this lineage that pointers in this territory often borrow purposive language without meaning it. See what I mean? The purpose of consciousness is to reveal itself to itself. That sounds like a purpose statement. It's not. It's a description of what is obviously happening, dressed up in purpose language, because purpose language is the only language the mind will sit still for. The mind, hearing what sounds like a purpose, settles into consider it, and in the considering, quiets down. You ever thought of that? What is the purpose of consciousness? It's to reveal itself to itself. And then the mind starts chewing on that. Meanwhile, other things can happen. Right? You think the purpose, you think the point, a lot of times the pointers are to deliver some information. They're not. They're actually to keep the mind busy a lot of times, right? Okay. So let's see, where are we? It says that's the device. The pointer was never claiming a teleology. It was using the shape of teleology to shut up the meaning maker long enough for the meaning maker to see itself. Same with consciousness is magnetizing itself towards awakening. There's no goal in consciousness. Awakening is simply an apperception and manifestation that has already happened, is happening, and will happen, with no one steering and nowhere in particular for it to be headed. But the sentence does its work. When meaning leaves the scene, life simply lives itself. And when one says, I am being lived, one is, strictly speaking, saying almost nothing at all. There is no me in meaninglessness. There is no being lived as opposed to living, because the dichotomy required a someone, and the someone has been seen through. The bridge sentence is still useful. It catches the mind in mid-step, lets it down on the other side, and then quietly disassembles itself. Ramen is two thorns. You use the bridge to cross, and then the bridge gets thrown away with the thing it removed. All of this may sound wordy and overly intellectual, I know that, but it has substance. It has a flavor you can taste. Back in that drab building in the Bay Area, those accounts payable folks had stopped agreeing with the small story that they had been handed and had felt in the energy of the room. What happens when one layer of meaning overlay gets peeled back? They felt it without naming it. The presence in that building was real, rooted, and at a source. What we're pointing at in satsang is the same energy with elimination taken all the way down. Right? Not a better story for the seeker, no story for the seeker. Living without meaning in this sense of meaning is not deprivation. It is what you actually are. Yeah, and it is so simple. And as Ramesh would say next, and it is so difficult. Right. So there you go. So as I say, this is something to continue. This is something to continue to watch, right? Watch yourself, right? For instance, say that you're really impressed that you so far have grasped all the concepts in Advaita. You're really doing well. And so someone says to you, hey, here's a pointer or a concept. You say, no, 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 I got that one. That's defensiveness, right? And what are you being defensive about? Holding a pointer, holding a concept. Don't worry about holding a pointer or a concept. Every time you hear it, see what it has to offer. Right? You're going to hear it over and over and over again. The hammer blows. Then they're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper. But you have to watch yourself on that one because it happens by itself. I can't tell you how many times. Oh no, I got that one. That's the first sentence in the language of Alan. I got that one. Oh no, I heard that. I got that pointer. No, that one. Right? There it is. Right? The insistence on meaning. In fact, I'll defend it because I've got this one. Right? And all you've got is the next story. All you've become the guy that looks humble, the guy that looks vulnerable, the guy that looks awakened. That's all you grab when you grab that. Right? And so when they say that a sage, a yoni, walks into a place and nobody knows he's there, right? Why is that? Because the body mind is simply being lived and is in response to what's there in whatever particular moment it all arises by itself, right? Why would there be a reason to notice that? Right? A wise man that wants to be noticed is not a wise man. It's that simple. So watch yourself on that one. That's something you can always watch. Right? I can tell because defensiveness is really cool. It's like a mousetrap, man. Bang. It's right now. It's out your mouth before you basically track it.
It's a mouth trap.
Yeah, a mouth trap. But right, it's out your mouth before you can track it. But hey, that's great. Just get to notice it, get to laugh. That's the entertainment of the what you used to think you are that you know you're now not, right? But it'll continue to entertain. The ego will occupy the stage until it sees it doesn't have to, that it can sit in a chair and take a rest. But until then, it's dancing. So be prepared, just watch it. And when you do, nothing to do, right? And that's the beauty of the concepts. If you don't remember the concepts, don't worry about it because they're doing the work, you're not, right? This is the one time that's what's going on.
here's something that's kind of intriguing. I mean, virtually all conversations that happen in the world are the exchange of stories, you
Mhm.
know, without the silence that underlies all these things. And I just wonder what it would be like if there was suddenly a world full of no story exchange because
Well,
we're so linked to our stories, nobody has anything else to talk about.
yeah. Well, Osho used to talk about, he would say, notice that some old couples, he says they'll just sit there and they don't say anything at all. And he said, because there's nothing to say. See, if you're not updating yourself, right? If there's no need to update yourself, if that's gone, right? And you've lived with somebody for 50 years or whatever it is, and you're wonderfully comfortable with that arising, what's there to say?
Yeah.
What's the point? So you see that. You see there actually is a rising of exactly that space that you're talking about, right? Just happening by itself because there's really no reason. Yeah. And that's why they would say, Papaji was famous, come to satsang and be quiet. Right? And that was because the be quiet part, it'd get pressurized and you needed to go to satsang so some talking could happen, right? That's what satsang became, for. There's this one meme that I absolutely love. I grew up in Southern California, and I came from a poor orange town, dirt kid, grew up in the dirt. Um, so even in those days, we had Santa Monica, and Santa Monica was where the special people lived. We called it the West Side, right? That was the side out by the ocean. And people like me that came from the Orange Groves, we didn't live there. So Californians notoriously would make fun of the folks that lived, and of course they made fun of the hicks that lived out in the dirt, but that was their thing. So, but one day recently, I saw this meme, and it was a picture of someone in their 20s. It was a young man, right? And you could tell he was holding his breath, and oh boy, he was almost done. He had been holding his breath for a long, long time, right? And underneath the caption said, "It's been 10 minutes since he told anybody he was vegan."
Told anybody it was what?
He was vegan.
Oh.
As Santa Monica West Siders are all
Oh yeah,
vegan.
yeah, I got
That's
it.
part of being one of the special people, right? And so, but also part of being one of the special people is making sure everybody knows that that's what you're up to, right? That's part of the mystique of that side of town. And I always laugh because that's image management, right? Right. Image management is always making sure everybody knows who you are. So, so meaning and action. Been 10 minutes since he told anybody he was vegan. The dog barked just as I said that, so I knew that was going to get lost. So, yeah. All right, that's what I have for today. Any comments before we wend our way?
Um, I'm kind of tempted to read something, but I'm not sure. I don't want to take things over here because I've said some stuff already. But the first line of this poem is, sometimes I think silence is my only friend. It's very short. Can I read it?
Go for it.
Okay. Sometimes I think silence is my only friend, not the external silence of no sound, not even the internal silence of many meditations gone well, but the silence that has no echo anywhere, the silence of no words rising to form judgments or opinions, or create the oh so common commentary that desperately springs from its imaginary source, hoping against hope that its compulsive clamoring for words and ceaseless stream of cynicism will silence the irresistible realization that the I in silence is the one and only I.
That's beautiful.
That's great. Thanks, Brad.
Oh, thanks.
When we when
Cool.
we first when we were first taught how to meditate in Osho's ashram, they would talk about that, how if you sat in silence and just watched, that pretty soon you could see that the words weren't attached. And I think that's uh
Yeah.
in your little piece. Yeah.
Well, you mean about a guy saying he hadn't spoken the word vegan for 10 minutes? You
Yeah,
know, the compulsive clamoring for words.
exactly. Exactly.
Oh,
Gian,
cool.
by the way, in the chat is asking if you'll send it over to him.
Who?
Gian.
Oh, sure, man. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, everybody.
Let me copy it real quick.
Okay.
I wrote this in 2013. It might not format exactly right, but here it is.
You're going to put it in chat?
Yeah, it should be in there now.
Brad, I'm on my phone right now. Could you send it to my Facebook Messenger, please?
Okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
Are we already friends? I think we are.
Yeah, my name's Tanner Menard in Facebook.
So you have an alias on Facebook, huh?
Yeah,
Tanner, how's the last name spelled?
Menard.
Manard.
Men.
Menard.
Yeah,
Okay, no problem, buddy. Sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
That my mother gave me that name, so
I like it. Sounds good to me.
thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh,
Alan, I really enjoyed the last hour. The last couple of weeks, I've kind of been caught in my, as Ram Dass would say, caught in my puny separateness. So this is kind of a refreshing thing for me to hear, and kind of the takeaway that I got from tonight was basically like, don't overthink it, let it happen, let it evolve. And I'd been kind of forcing it a little bit, and I recognize that now. So I feel good for today's hammer blows. Thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And it's fun, like I say, it's fun to see it in yourself, right? Yeah, there was a piece where Tim was pointing to himself, and I'm going, yeah, yeah, we're in the same club on this one. Yeah. And it's just fun. Yeah, and you see the vulnerability goes away when that's going on, right? Comedy's wonderful for lack of vulnerability. It's like, oh yeah. So, all right, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Okay, man.
Thank
And
you.
Thanks,
I
Alan.
Thank you,
Thank
Alan.
you.
Appreciate it.
see you guys.